Our Continental Prime continues with updates on the impact of the Russia-Ukraine crisis on African countries. As Russian forces continue their shelling of Ukrainian cities on Sunday, former South African President Jacob Zuma has described Russian President Vladimir Putin as a man of peace. He says Putin's actions were justified in response to the United States threats and NATO eastward expansion. Zuma's support for Putin was expected after South Africa abstained from a UN vote condemning Russia's aggression. The Jacob G. Zuma Foundation statement repeated Russian talking points that Putin expressed both before and after the invasion. Now let's stay with the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its impact on Africans and the continent. Joining me now is from South Africa, Vinka Kashur. She's the chair of the Ukrainian Association of South Africa. Good to see you. And it's day 12 of the invasion of Ukraine by Russian military forces. Now, how have Ukrainians in South Africa been receiving this development?
Thanks for having me. First of all, we need to understand the scale of this invasion. At the moment, we have more than 1.5 million of people who left the country, who turned into refugees. There are also thousands of civilians that were killed, including those that are relatives of our community in South Africa. In South Africa, there are about 6,000 Ukrainians that are living temporarily or permanently. So our community has felt it very strongly. A lot of our relatives are now refugees. They also can't come to South Africa to stay with their families. There are also a lot of children that were killed or children that are left without parent supervision in Ukraine. So this scale is absolutely massive, and our community feel it very strongly. Majority of us have not been sleeping since the crisis started, and it's very difficult to accept that the country that was independent, that had its own developed institutions, is suddenly completely bombed. So the first day, as we remember, 24th of February, all the airports in the country were bombed. So this was the first reaction that we received from our relatives, that there were explosions outside, even there were no visible incidents, no people were harmed immediately. What is happening now, it's a completely different situation. It's an ugly stage of war, when civilians are killed when they're trying to escape the cities. A lot of our relatives are kept in the bomb shells and they can't leave the city because Russia doesn't allow for green corridors. So it's an absolutely massive humanitarian aid, and every single member of our Ukrainian association is trying to get together and to do everything we can to support Ukraine, and also to call on South African government to condemn Russian invasion in Ukraine.
Well, we actually understand how hard it's been for Ukrainians, especially those living outside Ukraine like yourself. But quickly here, the world is seeing an unprecedented sanctions on Russia. Do you think, such will help at least make the country back off and, Ukraine get back in order?
Yes, I agree. The sanctions are unprecedented, and obviously Russia will feel the sanctions, but they don't work fast enough to ensure that the Russian military forces withdraw from the territory of Ukraine. We obviously hope that personal sanctions, especially sanctions on oligarchs, their families, would be felt much stronger and will speed up this process. But as we speak, most of cities in Ukraine are shelled. are bombed. So we will expect more and more civilians being killed before sanctions will kick in.
And I presume, let me jump in here, apologies again, and I presume, listening to you, that your version of civilians and children, women that have been affected by this war are confirmed. So what's the level of humanitarian aid assistance of Ukrainians, especially in the war zone?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to understand what is happening. The normal services are not working. And this is not just, hospitals are not functioning properly because people with diabetes not going to get insulin, people with cancer not going to get their treatment, but also waste management systems are not working, shops are not working, so lots of cities don't have the basic provision. So on top of that, we have massive destructions where the roads are bombed, the bridges are not working, so it's not that easy to provide and to access many cities, and it remained quite dangerous as Russian forces continue attacking, trying to circle and keep hostage big cities. They are bombing infrastructure, critical infrastructure, especially central heating stations. And in Ukraine, it's winter at the moment, so it's very important to have warm houses, electrical supply, water supply. So they're trying to ensure that our cities are in a state of disaster, that people are suffering the most. Then, because of so many casualties, the need for basic protection, such as bulletproof vests and helmets, is extremely high. So at the moment, from what we understand, there is 60,000 items need per day. That's how many bulletproof vests need to be distributed, at least to civilians, to protect them. Obviously, there is no such supply not just in Ukraine, but also in the neighboring countries. There is also massive demand for first aid kits because of such a high level of casualties among civilians.
Let me jump in here again. You are in South Africa, where the former South African President Jacob Zuma has described the Russian President Vladimir Putin, in his words, a man of peace, whose actions were justified in response to the threats posed by the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization eastward expansion. So how does this resonate amongst your members, especially those in South Africa?
Thank you for this question. I think it's absolutely devastating for us to hear that, especially as the previous report, we were talking about challenges in the township, and we understand that those challenges are created because of poverty. And this poverty is a result of corruption that was happening during President Zuma. As you know, he has been recognized, certain of his activities as corrupt. He's still going through the process of state capture. The Commission has not published its final reports. So what is happening in Russia and what was happening during President Zuma is similar processes. This is stealing money from poor and giving them to the rich. So while we are fighting for Ukrainian independence, we feel here on the ground we also fight for South African democracy, because if South Africa is governed by people that are supporting President Putin, it's obviously that this direction, this trajectory is driving to poverty, driving against human rights, against democratic principles that are in South African constitution. So we really hope that we will manage to also convince the government to change their perception and to inform South African community about what is Russian offer.
Thank you for your time, Zvonka Kashur, Chair of the Ukrainian Association in South Africa.
Thank you.